Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Jesus proclaimed the gospel of the kingdom and cured every disease among the people. Alleluia. 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 The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and, spitting, touched his tongue. And he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, "He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In today's Gospel, Christ, the very, well, I guess in language they call it a phoneme. The sounds that came out of Jesus' mouth are recorded for us in today's Gospel, which isn't usually the case. The ideas that Jesus expressed, and in some sense the words he said, are given to us, but they're always in translation. You know, they're always, I think it's well known that Jesus spoke a language called Aramaic, and which is like related to the Semitic languages of the Middle East. The Gospels were written in Greek, so we have all the but this represents one instance where Jesus' Aramaic speech is recorded for us in the Gospels, and we hear Jesus say Ephphatha. And Mark knows that even to Mark, the author of the Gospel, he realized that even by the time he was writing, most of his readers wouldn't know what that meant. And so he has to quickly supply a translation. He says, Ephphatha, that is, be open. So Mark has to, but there's something about this proclamation of Christ that Mark wants us to hear for ourselves. It's as though he is aware that as a translator, there's a possibility that he could be standing in the way. In fact, I think there's an Italian expression. I don't know Italian too well. I don't know it at all, really. But there's an expression where even in English it sort of works. The Italian expression goes, "Every translator is a traitor." And in Italian it works better because I think the word traitor and translator sound very much alike. It's every, I don't know. Does somebody know it? No, I don't know. What is it?
Traditory, cruditory.
Oh, traditory, truditory. Okay, so you hear how much they sound alike. Thank you. Saint Mark seems to be aware of that, and so he wants to step aside and let us hear Christ ourselves, even though we need a translation. And I think that what's going on there is that Mark realizes that there's a force behind this declaration of Christ. There's something about what Jesus is doing in today's gospel that gets to the very essence of his ministry. And he's healing a man who can't hear. He's healing a man who can't speak. And he says, Ephphatha, be opened. And this, I think, is and this is what Jesus, again, Mark wants us to hear it. And I think we desperately need to hear it. We desperately need to know that Jesus wants to open us up in every way. Physically, healing us. We hear him healing diseases. But also to open us up in a spiritual way, in a moral way. And this, I think, again, is something that we need to hear, and our generation needs to hear it desperately. There are different times when Christ is preaching, when Christ is sort of was saying something, teaching a message. And perhaps I should speak only for myself. It can seem at times as though Jesus is talking to previous generations that struggled with issues that I can't really relate to. In fact, just last Sunday, Jesus was talking about, the cleaning of cups and bowls, and the way the Jews had these customs of the Jews of his day, and I think even today perhaps, have a custom of ritual washing and purification and so on. And Jesus is addressing that as an issue. And for someone like me, I feel like I need help in seeing how that relates to me. I've never been a compulsively clean person. That's just like one problem I haven't had. But in today's gospel, it seems to be the opposite case, where Jesus, I think, is speaking to our generation in a way that's far more relevant, I suspect, than it was ever the case for previous generations, especially Jesus' own. Because in our culture, we have a desire to be open. And I think our culture prides itself on its open-mindedness. There's a spirit of tolerance and toleration. And this spirit of tolerance and toleration is the open-mindedness, as we call it, looks at Christianity with a certain harshness. It believes, as far as I can tell, as far as I can see, this attitude sort of sees the moral commitments, the firmness of belief that Christianity enjoins upon humanity as a threat to openness, as a threat to tolerance, as a threat to being able to welcome people who are different from ourselves, and so on. And even, there's a certain resonance with Christianity. These virtues, after all, come out of what's a post-Christian culture. But I think the spirit of tolerance, the aspiration to welcoming others and to being just in that way, is a sign of maybe their origin from within Christian societies. They still sort of have a lingering resonance with Christian teaching. But in seeing the gospel and in seeing conviction as a threat to openness, as a threat to tolerance, or as a threat to being charitable, especially we might say firm commitments to what John Paul II called absolute moral norms, absolute commitments to moral teachings, to see this as a threat to openness, to see this as a threat to tolerance, to see this as a threat to being charitable, really shows how our modern culture, secular, increasingly aggressive as regards Christianity, we see how there really is, for whatever similarities there may be, whatever resonances there may be between our modern secular, tolerant culture and Christianity, this represents a gulf. This represents an insuperable divide between them. Christ wants to open us, but we might say that the Christian vision of openness is similar to the way in which we keep doors open. If you think about the way in which we keep a door open, the doors at the back, for example, are pinned open. They have little fixed objects that keep them pinned and open. And our commitments as Christians, our convictions of belief, our convictions regarding who Jesus is and was, our convictions regarding morality and what's right and wrong according to the Christian moral vision, which is put before us by the church, these keep us open. These prevent us from sliding back into ourselves, from retreating into our own selfishness, from lapsing into a sensualism or a narcissism and an egotism that ruins our ability to reach beyond ourselves towards other persons in justice and in mercy. The moral, broadly stated, the moral teachings of the church say that we can never use another person selfishly. We can never subordinate another person to our own selfishness, our own short-term goals. We have to treat every person as an unrepeatable gift of God. And there are certain moral stances that follow from that. Those convictions keep us open. They prevent us from closing ourselves off from others and treating other people as objects, as treating other people as a means to an end, as John Paul II often said in his teaching. Christ wants to open us up, and that I think is why Mark regarded this proclamation as so important And again, I think our culture needs to hear it more so, I think, than preceding ones. Every culture, of course, needs this, but we, I think, in a greater way. Jesus wants to open us up by the proclamation of his word, making us more open to others. There's a beautiful line from the Psalms where the line goes, we hear it at Mass often, it's probably familiar to you. It says, "The commandments of the Lord give joy to the heart." And that's the English translation. That's the translation that we hear most often at Mass. But if you look at it a little more carefully, I pretended to know Italian earlier. I'm going to pretend to know Hebrew right now. And the original, I was told once that the original Hebrew says that the commandments of the Lord widen the heart. And that's sort of hard to understand, at least at first glance. So it's no wonder the translators just say, well, let's put it as joy, because people understand that. In fact, I think the Latin word there that translates the Hebrew is dilatasti, which sounds like our English word dilate. Like when the eye doctor puts those drops in your eyes and your pupils get too big and you can't see right for a little while. At least that's what they used to do. I haven't been to an eye doctor, I think, in 30 years or so. But that's what I remember happening that to me once. But the idea is that the commandments of the Lord, what Jesus describes as the narrow way, or entering by the narrow gate, the way of restricting ourselves, the way of practicing discipline, the way of governing our minds and thoughts according to the law of Christ. This narrow way will widen us by confronting our selfishness courageously, by facing down and battling against the waywardness that's within all of us. By battling courageously and overcoming that waywardness, we will be made more wide, more open to others, more generous, better able to be concerned with the needs of others rather than preoccupied with our own selfish wants, better able to forgive rather than to sort of count up all of the wrongs that have been committed against us, real or imagined. That this is what Jesus wants for us. He gives us the narrow way. He gives us the commandments. He gives us the way of discipleship. But this is all for the sake of opening us. Again, opening us by his word, opening us to receive him, but then having received him, be open to receiving others, to bear with their faults, to be patient, to be kind and merciful, even when mercy and kindness is not given to us. This is how Jesus' word is to operate within us, and if we let it dwell richly within us, it will bear great fruit in opening us up in a real way, in a way that's really able to receive the people around us, in all of their imperfections, and again, it will embolden us to deal with our own imperfections. We receive Jesus but we also, we receive Christ in the Mass. We open ourselves up to receive the Lord. And we might say that in that sacramental gesture, Christ wants to follow through on that entirely, to open us up to receive him in our mouths, but open us up in our minds and our hearts. In this way, transforming us, preparing us to go out into a world broken and bent, stooped by sin, but good and worthy of a blessing. That's how Christ goes out in the world, and those who follow him will go out likewise.